So I present Dr. Jessica Walker. Thank you.
Thank you. The last time I gave this presentation, it was to a much fuller room. And it wasn't exactly the same presentation, but it had the same title. It was a room largely full of men that were older than me. And it transpired that they had, in fact, misprinted the program. And the title of my lecture was, "I Will Take Off My Clothes." I think it's fitting to start this presentation with that little anecdote because sometimes we are motivated by instincts that are detached from the rational, and failing to make allowances for that can lead to very tragic breaches of law. And it's appropriate that I follow the previous presentation because I too will be speaking to the issues surrounding Muslim dress and how Muslim dress is made to fit or made not to fit with Western law. To give you a bit of background about myself, I got my PhD not for anything related to human rights issues, but for revolutionary American history. But I was inspired by Thomas Jefferson to go back and study law with the intention of dealing with some of the more complex areas of racism and how racism can be explored in society without necessarily needing to be hostile. If I could start actually, how many of the people here are lawyers? I just need to know how much legal. All right, okay. So I'm going to talk about a particular case in the jurisdiction of Western Australia. So a very, very local, regional application of major international human rights issues in a country and a place that is supposedly about as solidly Western philosophically as you can get. I attended as a law student this case, which was the Queen and Anwar Syed, and it was a relatively minor sort of corruption matter. Someone who was in a position of power at a school was accused of abusing that power. Because it was a Muslim school, one of the witnesses came forward and said, well, I'm very happy to be a witness, but I'm very uncomfortable with removing my niqab. Can I give evidence with my face covered? And she indicated that if necessary, she was prepared to remove it in the interests of justice, but she asked the judge to consider whether or not she could give evidence with it staying on. And the judge called an interlocutory matter, had a miniature hearing that the jury was excluded from, specifically addressing this issue of whether or not it was appropriate for a witness to give evidence wearing a niqab. Now, it was very interesting for me because as a law student, I'd sat through this entire trial, and I think there was me, there was a journalist student from a rival university, so we were sort of, and that was it. There were just the two of us in the court. Then there was the jury and the two barristers at the front of the room. The day of the interlocutory hearing, there were 26 journalists in the room from all over the world. Now this was a minor hearing about a very local matter, and it turned into a media circus that leaders from all over the world, I don't know, some of you may have actually encountered it over here. I had colleagues in America writing to ask me about it. Our state premier came out and said that although he defended the right of people to dress according to their faith and religion, in this case it was not appropriate. Our Prime Minister, who is a lawyer herself, said she thought it was one of the limited instances when it should be removed, and I quote, "Because the essence of giving witness evidence is the court is making a determination over whether or not someone is telling the truth. I think it would be impossible to do it if you couldn't see someone's face." In a totally bipartisan move, the leader of our opposition came out and labelled the niqab a particularly confronting piece of clothing. Every conversation that anyone had socially for a week involved an expression of extreme opinion. Either people said, it was absolutely inappropriate for someone to give evidence with their face covered, or they came out the other way and said it was absolutely something that had to be respected. It was an expression of religion. We must be allowed to express our religious belief. All sorts of things were thrown around about intrinsic human rights. It all got, whichever side of the barrier you sat on, it was an intensely emotional issue. So ultimately, the judgment in Syed was against the witness. She was ordered to remove her veil, and because it didn't especially matter to, it was obviously something that mattered enough to raise it with the court, but she wasn't passionate enough about it to actually fight it on appeal. She let the matter rest and she gave evidence without the niqab on. But I will argue to you, that the judgment in Syed placed this phenomenal emphasis on the public perception of justice and actually didn't address at all the international instruments in the specific circumstances of that matter. Now, there are essentially, the United Nations Charter refers to religious rights, but from a lawyer's perspective, it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that really offers the first point of coverage. And it's Article 2 that forbids distinctions on the basis of religion. Article 18 reads, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship and observance." I apologise for those of you to whom this is very, very much old hat. I cover it because a surprising number of human rights lawyers aren't necessarily in touch with the actual international instruments that deal with this issue. So then the third major instrument is, of course, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which protects freedom of religion to an extent, but also relevant for the purposes of this essay. Articles 14, this presentation, Articles 14, 1 and 3 are the ones that protect the right to a free trial. So actually in this major international instrument you have both the force for and the force against encapsulated and protected. In terms of the actual implementation of those rights in Australia, Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights, and we don't have any sort of dedicated court supervising Australian law. We don't have a Southern Hemisphere equivalent of the European Court of Human Rights. We have a very limited freedom of religion clause in our constitution. Effectively what it says is the Commonwealth cannot pass a law that prohibits the free exercise of religion, but its terms are not comparable to Article 18 of the ICCPR. Unlike the UK, our courts have no guidelines for addressing the removal of veils whatsoever. So I guess the important point to take from that is that our principles of international law that we have subscribed to, we are signatories to all these agreements, but they've not been expressly and explicitly incorporated into Australian law in any way. But our High Court has said, and again I quote, "An Australian statute must be interpreted and applied as far as its language admits, so as not to be inconsistent with established rules of international law." That's Thomas and Mowbray for the lawyers who might be interested in looking it up. So our High Court has essentially said that unless there is an explicit law to the contrary, when in doubt, go to the international instruments. We have something in the Western Australian courts called the WA Bench Book, and it is an equivalent of your UK Bench Book. It's an equivalent in the sense that it guides in the same way, but actually what it says is for all of the rules governing what witnesses are allowed to wear, consult the UK Bench Book. It's a throwback to our colonial past. And its aim is to inform, assist and guide, to generate thought and discussion, and ultimately to enable all judges to deal confidently, sensitively and fairly with all those who appear before them. Chapter 3.3 offers specific guidance on dealing with a witness who habitually wears a face veil for religious purposes. And it suggests that in some instances, I quote, "a sensitive request to remove a veil with no sense of obligation or pressure may be appropriate. But it should not be made light," sorry, that's the end of the quote. It also says such a request should not be made lightly because of the trauma to the witness and because the trauma to the witness may have a negative impact on the evidence given. So what I'm trying to build for you is this picture of this incredibly emotive issue actually having a very clear base in law. And the clear base in law is there is no rule against giving evidence wearing a niqab, and there is case law that says if there's no rule against it, be governed by the international instruments. And the international instruments say do not prejudice against someone because of their religion. Keeping an eye on the time. Sorry, I can be quite difficult to stop once you give me a microphone. So the questions really that it boils down to in the context of human rights, I think, are of interest in the application of human rights in this context. Firstly, the question of is wearing a niqab religious practice for the purposes of the ICCPR? Is it something we can actually protect? And I think this is something that was raised previously. Apologies, I've forgotten her name. The previous speaker addressed the issue of why there should be an allowance made for women when it comes to the wearing of a niqab, as distinct from a Jewish man or a Christian man being allowed to wear their religious garb. One of the comments that's always made at this point is that according to Muslim law, the wearing of the hijab, the wearing of the niqab, these are all theoretically choices that women can make. Both traditional and more contemporary forms of appropriate dress are based on a general understanding of modesty derived from the hadith or Islamic tradition. And as I understand it, the degree of modesty to be assumed is affected by the relationship of the wearer with those present and the percentage of men and men who are not family members who are present. So beyond that core of agreement, there is room for interpretation or choice. As I understand it, and I apologise, I don't speak any of the original languages, I'm reliant on translations, but as I understand it, there is actually no explicit rule that's the equivalent of a commandment that says thou shalt cover thy face when in the company of men. There is that element of choice that complicates things for people. And there is incredible inconsistency in the international jurisprudence on this issue, with some lawyers have argued in favour of there being an actual requirement. I think in the New Zealand context, they said that for a court to make a decision as to whether or not wearing the hijab or the niqab was required by Muslim law would effectively engage the domestic courts in a heresy trial, and that was absolutely inappropriate. I know certainly in the US, in interpreting the US Constitution, the courts have adopted an element of a sincere belief test. As long as there is a sincere belief that it is necessary for the promotion of your religion or in accordance with a religious practice, that's sufficient to trigger the court's protection for it as a religious practice. Yes, in the New Zealand context, Justice Moore observed that, I quote, "The court cannot be drawn into attempting to determine the theological or other validity of the practice of wearing the burqa. It's sufficient that it's a sincerely held religious practice of the witness." In terms of the fair trial right, obviously set against this is this very clear suggestion that there cannot be a fair trial if a witness's face is covered. And I think that's really where it engages the emotions of people. There is just this incredible, overwhelming response that says, if you can't see a witness's face, how can you possibly assess whether or not they're telling the truth? Muslim women may come forward and say, well, it's in the eyes. Western women will say, well, we're not trained in reading people's eyes. We're trained to read faces. And if we can't see a witness's face, how do we know that they're not lying? Judges in Australian courts have said two conflicting things about this. Firstly, they've said a trial judge's opinion is always to be preferred over an appeal judge's opinion because the trial judge has had the benefit of seeing the witnesses, where the appeal judge has only had the benefit of reading their words. Now that's of limited use really, because there are issues of body language and eye contact, hesitancy of speech, even tone of voice. I know right now I'm feeling all the nervousness of sitting in front of you all, and I'm sure that there is that in my body language and my voice that's telling you that, even though I think I've become reasonably convincing at controlling my facial muscles on the subject until I start talking about it. So there are equally valid instances where the Australian courts have said it's just unreasonable to think that any person who's not a trained psychologist can ever assess whether or not a person is telling the truth from their appearance alone. And in fact, it's inappropriate for people to go on instinct because that's when prejudice happens. I mean, the essence of prejudice is to look at someone and go, I know what you're thinking. I can tell from your face. I know what you're thinking. You've got your eyes closed. I definitely know what you're thinking. The High Court has explicitly said, I quote, an ounce of intrinsic merit or demerit in the evidence, that is to say, the value of the comparison of evidence with known facts is worth pounds of demeanour. Chief Justice of our High Court has also referred to the growing body of work by professional psychologists that has said you can't evaluate credibility with any degree of reliability. I quote, trial judges should strive so far as they can to decide cases without undue reliance on such fallible considerations as their assessment of witness credibility. So I would argue that in fact, although the emotive response to the face covering is, I can't possibly tell if she's telling the truth or not, the reality of the situation is that based on facial signals alone, unless you're an expert or the star of your own TV show called Don't Lie to Me, not to point any fingers, you actually can't. There's always mixed signals. And of course, there's going to be more mixed signals in a situation where somebody feels that they're naked. Which brings me to the third quintessential point, the impact on Muslim women of forcing removal of the face covering. And there have been instances in the US where women have actually successfully claimed significant amounts of money in civil suits for being forced to take off their facial coverings. Notably, giving me the title of my presentation, Jinnah Mohammed brought a civil suit against Enterprise Rent-A-Car in the state of Michigan for an amount of $2,750. Rather than discussing her claim, the judge told her frankly that if she did not remove her niqab, her case would be dismissed because the face veils interfered with his ability to see whether or not she was telling the truth. Her refusal was couched in terms that certainly had resonance for me. I quote, I wish to respect my religion, she said. I will not take off my clothes. And couched in this language, one wonders whether, in fact, religious faith is really the central issue in these cases. I think very few women would ever agree to testify in court if they had to do it topless. I mean, I would ask all of the women in this room to consider, if I asked you right now to stand up and take off your shirt, if I said we would all do it together, if I banned the men from the room and said all of the women in this room are going to stand up and take off their shirt, how many of you would do it? Show of hands. Is there anyone in this room? Are there any women in this room who are prepared to take off their shirt right now? Anyone? And I think there is a degree to which if you have grown up in circumstances where you have always had your face covered, how could you not feel that was enormously confronting to be asked to remove it? And if you were asked to remove it, how could you ever guarantee that your facial signals weren't going to give wrong signals to a jury? If you're sitting there in acute discomfort, and your face is like this and you don't know where to look and you're playing with your hands, how can a jury assess whether or not you're telling the truth in those circumstances? Ultimately, in the Syed matter, as I said, the woman removed her face veils and gave evidence without them, and the man was ultimately convicted. She was a very minor witness. She didn't really need to give evidence at all to convict this particular gentleman. And on the 13th of October 2010, the Ontario Court of Appeal in Canada actually handed down a judgment that was, shall we say, less than complimentary of Western Australian practices. So clearly this is not a worldwide problem. But it would appear that in Australia at least there is very little real actual substance behind the lip service of freedom of religion and freedom of choice in this matter. And I would suggest that this strong bipartisan support for requiring a witness to display their face to the court would be unlikely to find so much as an echo if the reason for the face covering was medically based rather than religiously based. If I had a burn on my face and the doctors had said it's not really a good idea to take it off, but yeah, she'd be all right for an hour. I mean, how many people then would say, oh, well, she must. We can't tell if she's telling the truth if we don't see her scarred face. And I think it's ironic that adherence to courtroom procedure appears, at least in the Syed judgment, to have taken on an atavistic quality that's really almost as extreme as a witness's attachment to the Niqab, and according to some people, with almost as little logic. So that's really what I came here to say, bad-mouthing my own country. I apologise for that. Australia is really a wonderful place in a lot of ways, not this particular one. So thank you very much.
Okay, we have time now for a few questions or comments also from the audience. Who would like to go first? As always, if you could introduce yourself, would be great, please.
Thank you. I would like to thank you all. Not need for more introductions because I have introduced myself before, but I'm just surprised from this conference today. I was expecting more human rights actually to be discussed in this day as the first day, but I was surprised to find out that all the topics was about veil and about a Muslim woman, which is very ridiculous for me. I think that the people that gave lectures today was trying to do their best, but unfortunately no one of them was expert in Sharia law actually. So, for them was not clear enough to explain to us what a veil is and what a niqab is, what the difference between veil and between niqab, or what the difference between symbols in religion in general and veil for a Muslim woman. I completely disagree with those faults that was in Olympic before for Jewish that has a whatever a hat, or that one that say that I belongs to Jesus. Okay, let he do. It's his religion. It's his believing. If I abandon him from saying I belong to Jesus, does he belong to Jesus or not? He belongs to Jesus because it is in his heart. And Jewish, which has a scarf, his religion, if I forbid him from wearing this or not, and a Muslim woman has her religion. Why veil is such a very big issue? Veil is not a symbol for a woman, but is an order in Islam. And I'm talking here as a Sharia law lawyer, because I'm specialized in this. And I can explain you more than everyone that, with all my respects, explained to us today. Maybe my English is not such good and such excellent to do this with a very high level words, but actually you should understand, all of us should understand something. Politicians and the media should understand that wearing a veil for a Muslim woman is an obligation is a rule, a written rule in Quran. It is like all the rules that are obligated for all citizens under which live in a country. They want to obey this rule, okay, they are free. They don't want, they have segregations, but in this case with their Lord. That's all, not with their state. No one forbid any Muslim woman to take place in Olympic, even in short, if she wants to do this. This is against Islam. This is between her and her God. It is not between people. She wants to wear something, she can wear, as all the other people can wear everything that they want to wear. So I thought that the topics of discussion today was how we can involve women more in our society, how can we give them more rights for job and for even for a sound, to don't be a silent society, but to have a one voice for women. But is all the problem why a Muslim woman wear a scarf? No, it is not. Because I'm a diplomat since 10 years, and my veil never has been a barrier between me and my job or my relationship with the other part of the world. I don't see it like this. I don't know why the others see the veil like a barrier between people. And no, this is only the concept that media and politicians are trying to put in our hands, or to wash our brains with this kind of things. No, it is not. A Muslim woman is a woman. If I have this scarf, or if I take it out, I will be the same person, with the same character, with the same personality. This scarf will not change me. This is something that the people should know. It is, I have wear it because I believe, and I'm not from Muslim countries, from Arab countries I mean. I'm from Europe, from the heart of Europe. Even if I fill the applications, I write other whites, because my country do not believe in EU. But I'm from the heart of Europe, very heart of Europe. So it is not because a Muslim woman wear a scarf. This is not any problem at all. We have a lot of things to discuss because actually we live in a masculine society. This is what we should discuss here. This is what we should ask for women today. Not to wear or don't wear, it is just something very, very ordinary to spend times with these things.
Can I just address a couple of issues that you've raised there?
And sorry, just for veil, for niqab I mean. For those that do not know maybe the word niqab, it is just to put something over the face. It is not an obligation in Islam. If I respect those sisters that wear this thing, because me, myself, I find it very, very hard and impossible to do it. So I respect those. If they want to do, they can do. If not, it is not an obligation in Islam. It is up to them for their personality. What I'm talking here is the veil, not the niqab, because it is not obligatory in Islam.
I agree with much of what you've said. There is an element of... there are 2 points really that arise for me from what you've said. The first is that I'm not sure how many of you realise just how multicultural a place London is. I come from Kalamunda in Western Australia, and the first time I saw someone who wasn't a middle-class white person, I was 12 years old, and they were so exceptional, to not just to me, but to everybody around me, that it was a question of saying, who's that woman with that dark skin? How did it get that dark? Has she painted it? Now, of course, that wouldn't happen today, because when I was 12 years old, parents were still trying to prevent their children watching TV. Now there's a degree of international multiculturalism that just didn't exist when I was a child, not where I lived. So before you can move on to a happier place that is, let's not talk about this, let's talk about the inclusion of women, there is this massive wall of prejudice that needs to be dealt with. And pretending that it isn't there just forces it underground. A few years ago, we had a politician in Australia, a horrible, horrible red-haired woman called Pauline Hanson. I apologise if she has any relatives in the room. That's happened to me as well. She stood up and she said, I know what's wrong with this country. It's immigration. It's the foreigners. It's the boat people. The boat people are wrong with this country. Sorry, I've got that wrong. The boat people are wrong with this country. Now I'm going to throw the boat people out. Australia for Australians. She almost got elected. She did get elected in her particular area. Her party almost knocked down one of our two leading political parties. And that's just a response. There is so much prejudice out there and people are afraid to say it, and that makes it more dangerous, not less. So we do actually need to engage with these issues and let people have the opportunity to say, I am racist, so that we can say to them, well, why are you racist and how can we unpick that? The second point that I would raise in relation to what you've said, when I discovered, which was 6:18 a.m. this morning, that I was going to be speaking this afternoon, I had a little panic attack. I tried on everything in my wardrobe. I went out and bought a new pair of stockings. I put on copious amounts of makeup. I'm actually 10 years older than I look. And that's because I'm a woman. When my partner finds out he's doing something exceptional, he gets up and he puts on his suit and he puts on his comfortable but smart shoes and he brushes his hair and he checks his teeth. And that is not because I don't believe that there is an enormous amount of prejudice in London today. It's self-inflicted. I don't believe any of you would have cared if I'd come in here with my hair hanging loose and a man's business shirt on, comfortable shoes, no makeup. I can't believe anyone in this room would have cared, but I would have cared. And that's what true prejudice does to us. That's why we as a society of women, not me personally, I have no issues with the veil whatsoever, but I believe that's why a lot of my contemporary women have an issue with it. It's not to do with Muslim women at all. It's because we have fought and fought and fought for equality ourselves, and we are almost there. And the thought of covering up our own faces, or the thought of saying it's okay for someone to cover up their face, has so much resonance with a period of our oppression that we've suffered ourselves and are still suffering the final effects of, that we can't be rational about it yet. I think there is just too strong a visceral reaction from too many women to be relaxed and rational. And I apologise, that's a long-winded answer to a short question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walker. I think clearly we can't do true justice to all of these issues in a limited time, but I think it was great to actually begin this discussion also in terms of the headscarf and beyond. It's also a topic I'm very interested with too, since I covered it very closely in the German media, especially as Germany was debating. Before you leave the stage, though, I would like to take the opportunity, if we could please express our gratitude to Dr. Walker. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.